Life begins in the ocean a long, long, long time ago. Before I get into my whole lecture, I'm going to give you a very quick reminder of who I am. The person with progressive MS, 7 years of steady decline, 4 years in decline wheelchair, could not sit up in the chair as you guys are now, despite getting the best therapy from the best people around the country, taking the latest, newest drugs. I took a paleo diet in 2002 and continued to decline for 5 more years. So the paleo diet was not enough to fix me. Supplements was not enough. Functional medicine and their supplements was not enough. It was when I did the very intensive diet and lifestyle change that really was magical, and in a 1-year period got me back up, walking around again and doing an 18-mile bike ride with my family. Vegetables rock. Now, back to what I'm talking about today. Life begins in the ocean, and we often forget that. Now, if we think about the timeline of life in the billions of years, and this is a very quick, very, very high-level overview. So 4.5 billion years ago, we had water, then we had simple life, then we had photosynthesis, then we had an oxygen crisis, then we had the first huge major die-off because of oxygen. Fortunately for us, mitochondria evolved, and that allowed us to utilize this poisonous compound oxygen in a much more effective way to generate ATP that we could use to drive the complicated cellular biochemistry of life. And then that allowed us to develop multicellular organisms, animals, and then land plants 500 million years ago. And of course, you know about the dinosaurs. And mammals emerged, we think, around 200 million. And humans only 250,000 years ago. We are really newcomers in life. Our guts began when we began a multicellular existence, and we brought that ancient microbial world with us in our guts. And that is where our human ecosystem began. We are not individuals. We are an ecosystem, and our health depends on the health of our ecosystem. We have co-evolved with those organisms, and remember that microbes divide on average every 20 minutes for about 1 billion years. So they have been rapidly adapting to the environment. Billions and billions and trillions of generations. I was going to do the math, but it was too cumbersome, so I gave up on that. Humans, on the other hand, Homo sapiens, 250,000 or 500,000 years, so maybe 10,000 generations. So we've had far less time to adapt. We have a very cooperative and mutualistic relationship. We are superorganisms, as dependent on the microbes as our cells are dependent on the mitochondria to function. We need our microbes. And remember, we have a gut garden that has evolved for the mutual benefits that began in the ocean. And the microbes in our gut are under selective pressure to manipulate our eating patterns for their benefit. Now, they can do that by having us crave foods that are good for the microbe, or inducing mood changes so that we crave foods that are good for the microbes. That may not be good for us overall. Now, you've heard many times about the hygiene hypothesis, the lack of immune system challenge. Appropriately, when we are very young, can lead to immune-related problems. And if our environment's too clean, we're much more likely to have an abnormal and overly aggressive response to viruses, bacteria, fungi, parasites, or environmental proteins such as pollen, animal dander, fungal spores later in life. And the lower the microbe diversity, the higher the risk for asthma, allergies, autoimmunity, and frankly, nearly every chronic health problem. This is a very interesting paper that looked at water sanitation and the risk of Alzheimer's. So if we have clean water, for some reason we have an increased risk of Alzheimer's. Why is that? I don't really know. And I was certainly trained that parasites, worms living in my gut, are parasites. And yet 80% of the human population has some type of intestinal parasite. Now, some very interesting animal data looking at helminths, that is worms, in the immunologic interactions in autoimmune-related diseases, showing that in an animal model, a variety of worms lead to decreased activity in the animal models of these autoimmune diseases. And this one looks at helminths, worms, that were, and this was pig whipworm. The person who first started studying pig whipworms was at the University of Iowa. And he has a colleague who studied this in MS patients. 5 patients newly diagnosed with relapsing remitting MS were given pig whipworms, I think every 6 weeks. And they followed them for 2 months. And what they saw was a trend in the correct direction for decreased disease activity. Now, when you have only 5 patients, you expect only to have a trend, not statistical significance. Now, here's another person, a functional medicine doc, who created a business using rat tapeworms, grows them up in beetles, and feeds the beetles eggs over to humans, again, about every month, I believe. And for some autoimmune conditions, they have decreased disease activity. Now, the problem is that sometimes they have increased autoimmune activity. So certainly not a guarantee, but this is being offered here in the US and also for those of you who are in the UK. Early, interesting stuff. And there are increasing amounts of data and papers coming out about the connections between what's going on in our gut and in our brain. I'm going to show you a bunch of various slides that the molecules that are result of the metabolism that occurs from the microbes living in our gut as the bacteria eat each other's byproducts, and some of these byproducts cross over into our bloodstream that will then be transported into our brain, can influence our neurotransmitter production, can influence the output of the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. They will also influence our immune cells. So it influences our mood, appears to influence our cognition, and influences the activity of our immune cells. Here's another paper that talks about the impact of diet and the microbiome in our immune cells. And every week, more and more papers are coming out with a more detailed understanding or proposed understanding of how that very rich microbial world that lives in our guts, ranging from our mouth to our stomach, our small bowel, large colon, and on our skin, that interacts with our immune cells and therefore also our brain. Now, this is a very interesting study that looked at the early in life in how our microbiome evolves and then correlates that with changes in our brain. I just find it fascinating. And I've really never thought about how critical those early days and early years are for brain growth development and how that's tied into the food that we eat. And are we being as thoughtful and as intentional about how we are feeding our children? And I would say certainly we are not, given the high levels of sugar and white flour and the relative lack of vegetables that we are feeding our kids. And as you know, I'm very... I'll turn this back down. Now, I'm having a little trouble with spinal stenosis, which is why I'm not standing. The reason I'm walking around with walking sticks is that has nothing to do with the MS. My neurologist I just saw recently pulled up all of my MRIs from 2010, went through them, said no disease activity, you've done really well, no atrophy, I wish my brain was as good as yours. But your pain is due to the spinal stenosis and sent me off to surgery and PT, et cetera, et cetera. So intermittently I have to sit a lot more than I used to. Now, anyway, back to the lecture. The interesting, again, this is animal study data, but fascinating that the microbiome that was grown impacted the genes related to myelin in the prefrontal cortex. Fascinating to think that our microbiome may be impacting how we generate and produce myelin. And again, another MS study. This is out of Japan, 20 MS patients, 40 controls. And they did comprehensive analyses. And so there was a depletion of Clostridium species related to the priming regulatory AH17 cells. So the absence of these Clostridia species, and there were 200 that were lost. And the question that they're speculating on, is this contributing to the loss of Treg cells, which then lead to decreasing tolerance? Interesting stuff. Small study. This is a study from actually a colleague that's involved in my research program now, who looks at MS patients and did 31 MS patients, 36 control patients, and analyzed the microbiome, and saw, again, there was statistically significant difference in the gut microbiome between these two populations. Again, very small study. I can't make anything too definitive other than there's probably a big impact with the gut microbiome on MS patients. This has to do with another autoimmune condition, rheumatoid arthritis. Now, in terms of relative frequency, there's 800,000 people with MS in the US and 4 million with RA. And this looked at the microbiome of these folks. And basically, as people were treated with the RA, their microbiome changed, and they were able to identify distinct patterns for people who had active disease, treated disease, and quiet disease. And this is some of those interesting pictures. And the microbiome changes were different in the mouth and in the gut as well. This is an interesting study that looked at the microbial community in 3 adults, following them over 105 days. And they saw mood state also was reflected in changes of the microbiome day by day. Fascinating stuff. Again, very small study. It's hard to make a lot out of that other than say that's really interesting. The microbes have a big impact on our brain. Again, some interesting studies looking at what populations change according to what moods that we have. And this is a paper about microbiota accessible carbohydrates. So those are the carbs that we can't digest and absorb, but our microbes can, and they will digest, and then we may be able to absorb the byproducts. And again, this is a mouse study. What they found is, as you had successive generations of fiber-poor diet, you would lose the microbial diversity, which you could get back if you increase the fiber, but not after the 3rd generation. So it becomes more difficult the more generations removed you are. Mechanism for that, not entirely clear. Now, I'm sure many of you in this audience know about the study in Burkina Faso, where we compared the microbial diversity in the colon of kids in this African village to Italian kids. And of course, we saw that the African children had many more Bacteroidetes and a depletion of Firmicutes, and a much richer diversity of species. And here's a look at the Hadza, a hunter-gatherer society. And what we've seen in several studies is that diversity declines as we become urbanized, from the hunter-gatherers to the foragers to primitive farmers, subsistence farmers, to U.S. dwellers. And what we're seeing is the Hadza have 1,600 different species, traditional farmers about 1,200, westernized to urban 600 to 1,000, and if you're chronically ill, you have even less. Okay. So the human gut microbiome, I think I already covered that. Diversity declines as we get urbanized. This came out last year. The Amerindians, I believe this was in Peru, although it might have been, I think it was Peru. The Yanomami, they're observed by helicopter. They're a 2-week journey to civilization. They did have words for medicine, so clearly they've had some contact with Western society. And when they analyzed their gut microbiome, they had twice the diversity of other hunter-gatherer societies. Now, and again, these are those pretty pictures. Now, some of the other things that they're finding when they analyze these hunter-gatherer societies' poops, I don't know how they get consent, but somehow they do. They find that they have treponemas, which, by the way, is the same family as syphilis, and a number of other species that, if I had them or my patients had them, I would consider them to be pathogens and would be treating them. And so, part of the question I think we have to raise is the concept of pathogen is overly simplistic. It is not so much the individual species, it is the community in which that microbe is part of that contributes to, that creates a disease or health for that individual. Now, the microbiologists that are working with me in my current studies taught me this, that the viruses that we have living in us are critical to our health, because the viruses in the gut help determine which microbes will thrive and which ones will not thrive. So we have 100 trillion bacteria and archaea, but we have 1,000 trillion different viruses. So they're a vital part of the microbial system for us. Okay. Now, another question, what urbanization is leading to loss of microbial organisms and genes? Now, you and I have about 23,000 genes. If we had those 1,600 different microbial species, we would have 9 million genes to help us run our chemistry of life. But as we diminish those genes, because our microbial diversity has gone from 1,200 to 1,000 to 600 to less, we're losing those genes to help us run our metabolic functions. And what is the consequence of that? And this was some of their really very beautiful graphics of the life of a tree and how things get less diversified as we have a smaller and smaller number of species. This is another interesting graphic that looks at the gut microbiome of the hunter-gatherer and the urban dweller. And the hunter-gatherer has wild foods, 200 different plant species in the year, and there's seasonal and annual changes with what foods it is that they're eating. Food is contaminated, there's a certain amount of bacterial overgrowth, and they're eating a lot of dirt because they aren't washing their hands. They don't have this a lot of water and soap immediately available for everything. In the urban, we have industrialized food that is largely sterilized, lots of antibiotics, and if we're lucky, we may be having the Mediterranean diet with a lot of vegetables. The consequence is that we have a different level of resistance to perturbation if we are challenged. When we have a widely diverse hunter-gatherer microbiome, we have much greater resilience for that microbiome. We don't have resilience, and we're at much greater risk of getting C. diff. Here's another lovely graphic. And the message I'm trying to teach you here is you all have a unique mix of what organisms are living in your gut. And you have different organisms that are doing different parts of the metabolic functions. And over our 250,000 years or millions of years that we've been mammals, we've been passing that bacteria down from mother to child through the vaginal vault. And we've been passing those genes that run the metabolic function of your biochemistry for a long time. And what bacterial species we've been passing on, mother to child, will vary, of course, by region and geography and time and what we're eating. But we have, in theory, relatively remarkable stability in terms of what metabolic pathways are covered when we are healthy. Now, what this paper is showing you is that when you eat a lot of animals, not many plants, you have a different microbiome mixture. And when you have a plant-based diet and no animals, you have a different set of bacteria living in your bowels. And this changes very quickly. So the food you eat will change your microbiome in about 3 days. It happens very, very quickly. So the more diverse the diet, the more diverse the microbiome, and the more adaptable or the more resistant it will be to perturbations or stress. And as we lose our dietary diversity, as we lose the diversity of species, we're more vulnerable to stressful events. And what's happened? Now, we have obviously changed, we know that we changed our diet in a very big way, thank you. When we became hunter-gatherers, became farmers, we started eating a lot of sugar. You've seen that graph, and we do it because it tastes so darn good, and it's marketed so well. And we really want our sweet food, so we keep trying to, this is the number one question people ask me is, what artificial sweetener can I use? And I say, none, get over it, get past your addiction. Eat these things, they're known as vegetables, they're really, really good for you. Glyphosate Roundup is number one herbicide worldwide. We thought it'd be really safe because it only attacks the microbial pathways. It kills beneficial bacteria. It's sterilizing our soil, disrupting the soil microbiome worldwide. And because soil bacteria interact with root hairs as plants absorb minerals and nutrients, this is making our foods less nutrient dense. It's also because the glyphosate's getting into the food supply that we eat and our animals eat, it's leading to resistant organisms, both in the animal husbandry world and in our world. Toxigenic E. coli, Salmonella, C. diff, as I'm sure all of you know, are rising cause of infectious agents. What you may not know is we all know it's on the GMO foods, but in addition to the GMO foods, it's being applied 3 days before harvest to increase the efficiency of harvesting grain, legumes, rapeseed, which is for canola oil, flax, kiwi, grapes, sunflower, potatoes, and alfalfa. And because weeds are getting resistant, we now have Duo Herbicide, which is glyphosate plus 2,4-D, which is half of Agent Orange. So that's now on corn and soybeans. Now I'll get back in the part of, okay, you've really depressed me. What can I do about it? So the microbiome begins with mom because she's got to pass her microbes on to her child, so the child should get born through the vaginal wall. Usually faces towards the rectum, so the baby might get a mouthful of poop on the way out, which would not be so bad. As long as they don't inhale it, they should just sort of get it on the lips. If you're a C-section baby, you've got more obesity, asthma, diabetes, mental health problems, and autoimmunity. And if you come out through the C-section, you have staph and strep in the gut. Now, many more hospitals are now swabbing the vaginal secretions and swabbing them on the face and baby. Breastfeeding, human milk has human milk oligosaccharides. Baby cannot digest it. It's there to feed the bifidobacteria. Signs of trouble in kids, and my kids had some of these: colic, constipation, diarrhea, antibiotics, infections, rashes, neurobehavior problems, autoimmune problems. I've already started to go over that. The big clue here is vegetables. We shouldn't be giving our kids sugar, artificial sweeteners, or fruit juice. They should be eating vegetables, and they should be getting breastfed, and they should play in the dirt a lot. Don't be so compulsive about washing their hands. Saccharomyces Boulardii is the most studied yeast probiotic. Lactobacillus rhamnosus is the most studied bacterial probiotic. The lactobacillus live in your small bowel, as does the Saccharomyces bifidobacter in the colon. Eat fermented foods. Now, what you may not realize is most of our probiotics are derived from fermented foods. It would cost millions and millions and millions of dollars to do the trials to get a new strain that's not been captured from the fermented foods. So very few companies are going to be doing that. Probiotics are grown in vats. Remember, they divide every 20 minutes. And species have probably lost the ability to engraft and stay in your gut. So my advice is fertilize your gut garden. VSL number 3 and Saccharomyces Boulardii. I think there's some evidence that those two probiotics can still engraft. Fermented cabbage is easy to do, easy to make at home. It's not that expensive. It's lots of fun. Kombucha is another very easy thing to do at home. These are great family activities. If you're going to have Saccharomyces, they will kill Candida and may release toxins. So if you begin taking Saccharomyces Boulardii or drinking kombucha, you may see some increased symptoms from the die-off. And in my practice, I have people take activated charcoal, 1 to 2 capsules, at least an hour before taking meds. I warn them it's terribly constipating. They can increase the Saccharomyces up to 3 to 4 capsules 3 times a day and maintain a dose that maintains the favorable response. Because yeast overgrowth, candida overgrowth is so common, this can be quite helpful. Make these changes gradually, and remember that it's constipating. You need to figure out how to deal with the constipation. So more fiber, more prunes, more prune juice, milk of magnesia. Keep pooping. We'll have more poop shows in just a moment. So pooping, the Westernized society average is 15 grams. That's not much. The target is 30 grams, not much. If you're following my level 1 diet, you're at 80 grams. If you follow the hunter-gatherer diet, you're at 100 to 150 grams. So my advice is pretty simple. I'm thinking it's probably good for us to be closer to our hunter-gatherer friends at 100 to 150 grams. The resistant starch types. Oh, I got to move it along. Nuts, seeds, plantain, green bananas, cooked, then cooled, containing legumes, starches that have been chemically altered. And I'd also say, please avoid raw potato starch. It's filled with glyphosate. Those are conventionally grown potatoes. And that's why people using the potato starch have more C. diff. That's because they have a lot more Roundup. So my advice, you've heard this before, 9 cups of vegetables, rock it. So a plate full of greens, a plate full of deeply pigmented vegetables, and a plate full of sulfur. I'm very specific. I want cabbage family, onion family, mushroom family, because that will help you with detoxifying and excreting the bad things, including Roundup. You can take more acid in form of vinegar, lime juice prior to meals. Go organic as your budget allows. Get rid of fructose. We should not be using coconut sugar, agave, honey, maple syrup, maybe 1 teaspoon a day. If it's sweet and it's a gluten-free product, it's really probably not good for you. I think the gluten-free products you should be eating are vegetables. Vegetables. The gluten-free products that come in a box are really expensive and have too much white sugar. Poop. The most potent test you have at your hands, well, hopefully not your hands, is in your toilet. Look at your bowel movements. When you go to the bathroom, when you're finished, please stand up, turn around, and look before you flush. Are you pooping pebbles? Are you pooping snakes? Do you have blobs? Do you have watery problems? If you're having inflammatory bowel disease, mushy, watery stuff, you can't have raw vegetables. You got to do soup, stews, bone broth, until you get things under control. Then you can come back to more vegetables. Everybody's poop should be like this, 2 to 3 times a day. And this is the best single test I can give you. Gradually increase your fiber-resistant starch. Vegetables are your very best way of doing that. Plantain, green bananas are fine. Chia seeds, soaked seeds, nuts, raw starchy vegetables, they're good. If you want to monitor your microbiome, it's sort of a fun thing to do. You can, but the most important thing is to stand up after you have a bowel movement, look at the toilet, and see what it looks like. Eat more vegetables. Eat more vegetables. Eat fermented foods. Just don't eat those things. You're addicted. It will take time. It can take months to years. Don't expect to rehab your bowel or your poop immediately. The more antibiotics, the earlier you've taken them, the more damaged. We'll sort of cover this, because I wanted to tell you a little bit about my research. You know about this? Oh, 1 minute. Okay, we're going to just sort of flip through this. These are the changes in the mood that, so people had improved anxiety and depression, improved cognitive skills, more measures of improved cognitive skill. And the most powerful association that we had was vegetables and fruits and being gluten-free and dairy-free. And I thought it was pretty interesting. It's important to exclude the gluten, dairy, and I think egg for many people. But the vegetables and fruits are the most powerful predictor of health in terms of cancer, heart disease, stroke risk, cardiovascular disease, dementia. Vegetables rock. Good things are happening. There's my previous book. Here's my upcoming book. We're recruiting for a new study. I've got the emails up for you there. MS diet study, or Catherine-Chenard. You need to have relapsing remitting MS and fatigue. I'm recruiting for a postdoc. So you can also, I'm supposed to stop. I'll go just a bit longer. I have in-person events you can come to every August. We also have a certification program for health professionals as well. And now I'll stop so we have plenty of questions. Thank you.
We have plenty of time for questions, so please come up to the center microphone.
I promise I will not ask you to describe your poop.
I'm not too worried about that. Thank you so much. It was a wonderful talk, and it was a pleasure to hear you in person. My question is, what are your thoughts on the role of viruses in triggering autoimmune cascade, and also how do you manage viruses? Since everybody seems to be having lots of viral issues today, and how do you really manage?
Okay, so I think viruses are certainly a possibility. We also have things like Chlamydophila, Bartonella. Parasites can be a problem for some folks. My advice is to see a functional medicine doc for that eval. Be sure you have your vitamin D fully optimized so you can get the benefits of antimicrobial peptide, and support your reducing co-infections such as gingivitis, floss your teeth, brush your teeth with oil and essential oils to reduce your gingival inflammation, and eat more vegetables.
Thank you.
I really loved your talk. Thank you so much. Sorry, I'm losing my voice just a little bit. I've been talking way too much. The question I have, there's two schools of thoughts, or maybe more. Some people are following like the ancient primitive Inuit and said you don't eat any veggies and you'll be fine.
Even the Inuit had summer 2 to 3 months a year.
Okay. And then you get another group, they're like primary veggies. What I've been looking for is who has not just the best health, but let's say you had great health, but you die at 50 or 70. Who has the best longevity? What was their diet? Because I found a group of people that did a lot of colostrum, kefir, a lot of milk ferments, raw meat. So I got on the 31 years ago when I was 20, I started doing tons of raw milk, fermented food. So I've been doing fermented foods 31 years. And I got into raw meats, red meats, 20 years ago. And when I switched to that, I thrived. I like cooked food for the flavor. Bone broths are great, but when I eat raw meat compared to cooked, it's night and day in terms of my power level, my health level, my clients. So I wanted to know what you thought. And last one thing, sorry.
Hey, can we do one question at a time? I can't remember that many.
Sorry. Yeah.
You know, so pay attention to how you respond. So I don't think any of us can give one diet that's going to be perfect for everyone. So listen deeply to your response. If you're doing well on fermented dairies and raw meat, and you have great health, great mood, ideal body weight, ideal body composition, then that's definitely what you should stay on.
And thank you. And the last one is, so many people who did these raw vegan diets had so much problem. And where's your cutoff for hard fiber to soft fiber that doesn't damage your small intestine? Where do you find that line?
So where's my cutoff? You have a bowel movement, you stand up, turn around, and take a look in the toilet. If you're pooping snakes, your current diet is a great one. If you're not pooping snakes, your diet needs to be adjusted.
So you don't mind hard raw vegetables? You don't think
if you're damaging? Pooping snakes,
then, all right, that's
then
what
you're
I
good.
Thank you
if
so much.
If you're not pooping snakes, then yes. It's a very cheap test.
Super talk. What is your opinion on, there's a lot of evidence from, empirically anyway, from say Bernard Jensen or Gerson on doing complete strip outs of the colon. And also maybe
the colonics.
Yes, and the value of replacing that with fecal transplants, because most of us have had flour products all our life. And
so we'll do that in two questions. Every time we strip out our colon, the question is who's going to overgrow. And the more often we strip things out, I think you're at greater risk of having the pathogens overgrow. So I'm not fond of doing many colonics for that reason. Fecal transplants. There's a clinic, Taymont Clinic in London, that does fecal transplants to treat dysbiosis. And they have had some incredible results with some people with autoimmune diseases, Parkinson's, who had dramatic improvement. But they've also had some unexpected results with changes in personality, weight gain, and new autoimmune problems. So it's exciting stuff, but it is an unknown risk.
Hi, Dr. Wahls. The slide went by so quickly. My doctor just prescribed VSL-3 for me.
Yes, VSL number 3.
Is good or bad? I didn't catch that by the
No,
slide.
it's good.
It is good. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Oh, I have 5 more minutes for questions. So more people can come up. If everybody wants to come up and describe their poop, we'd love to hear about it. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm a fan of your work. Thank you so much. My question is about garlic, and as I
Yes.
understand it, garlic selectively knocks out the bad ones and preserves the good ones. I haven't found any research to confirm that. Do you have any?
Well, I
Thoughts?
can't identify any research. I really love the garlic family of vegetables, the onion family. The garlic family has a long history of antimicrobial, antiviral. It is very good at upregulating a number of the enzymes involved in the detox pathways and in intracellular glutathione. And it also improves the fluidity of the blood. Great stuff for us. And it's really, it's really tasty. I love making fermented garlic. It's very good. I love roasted garlic. It's fabulous.
In terms of vegetables, I'm thinking, I know that I've read tables where, these are the vegetables you do not want to eat raw. So I'm thinking according to your protocol, I'm going to include that recommendation that some are always cooked gently and others are preferably raw.
So the benefits of raw is that you get the water-soluble vitamins intact. You get more enzymes intact. The benefits of cooked is you break down the cellular wall, you absorb many more of the nutrients. I, being the simple-minded person that I am, I like to have a mix of both. I believe in diversity. But listen to your gut. If you have a lot of GI issues, you may have to do a lot of bone broth, cooked vegetables, soup stews, and gradually introduce those raw vegetables.
Okay, and then just, I'm wondering if there's a recommended protocol for people with a family history of colon cancer, and so they do the 5-year colonoscopy. So
Well, I think the most profound thing we can do to reduce our cancer risk is not mammograms, is not colonoscopy, is not chest CTs. It's known as 9 cups of vegetables. And having more vegetables dramatically, and snake poops will dramatically lower your risk of colon polyps, breast cancer, and colon cancer. And you can decide, do you want to have those screening interventions or not? But you want to reduce the risk of formation, which means you got to nourish your cells properly.
right, I do that, and I'm just at the point now on the calendar where it's time for another one, and so, well, do I really want to clean out this colon that I've taken such good care of? So,
That's a big question.
yeah.
Hi. Can you say a bit more about fermented foods and particularly the disgust response that it triggers in some people? And I'm thinking about things like natto and fermented
Well, natto is
fish.
pretty disgusting. It has sort of a slimy mucoid. Yeah, so it's a superfood in Japan. My Japanese sister-in-law really loves it, and most Americans are disgusted by it. On the other hand, when we introduce fermented foods, I have people introduce very small volumes. So if you put a forkful of fermented cabbage on your salad, then that's pretty easy, or a little bit of fermented kimchi, and your gluten-free, nitrate-free broth can be quite delicious. So start very small, and you could start very small with beet kvass or kombucha and mix that with some sparkling water to make a very delightful beverage. The key for all these nutritional concepts is to start gradually. Although if you're in my clinical trial, we start you pretty quickly. It's not a gradual start then.
Thanks.
But we help people through that. 1 minute.
Okay, I'll ask about poop. I think it was the Bristol stool
Yes.
chart. It said that down at the bottom, the liquidy stool obviously indicates inflammation. But when you get on to more of a chronic constipation sort of thing, does that have an indication? I mean,
Well, constipation means you have the wrong gut microbiome, or watery stools, you have the wrong gut microbiome, and we need to help you fix that.
Hello, thanks for the talk. I want to ask you more about what you would recommend for small bacterial intestinal overgrowth.
I would recommend that you see your functional medicine doc for specific guidance.
Hi, What are some of the effects of fasting and sustained fasting on the microbiome?
I don't have any research to tell you what the effects are. I can just tell you from my personal experience, I love to fast. I like fasting 1 day a month. I would fast 3 days at a crack, and then I've since lost too much weight. My wife has said, you can't fast longer than 1 day anymore because you're losing too much weight. But there's tremendous health benefits to intermittent fasting. I just got the... So thank you all.